I think we'll start now. So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are joining us from. My name is Fahad Al-Turki, Vice President of Research here at King Abdullah Petroleum Research and Studies Center, as well as a board member at the Saudi Association for Energy Economics. It gives me a great pleasure to welcome you all to this webinar, jointly hosted by both KAPSARC and the SAEE, with the title, The Perspective from Saudi Arabia on Climate Change and the COP26 outcome. I'm delighted to say that we have more than or nearly 500 registration for today's event from more than 30 countries. And I would like to note that this is our last webinar for the year, but it will not be our last webinar we host on energy and climate related matters. So stay tuned for further announcements on upcoming webinars in the coming months. Back to the subject, today's webinar is timely and relevant. Timely because we just witnessed two major events last month. All of which are related to the energy and climate. And the first one is the Saudi Green Initiative, as well as the MENA Green Initiative. Both were done at early November, as well as the second event is the COP26, which was concluded in the first half of November. These events brought to the forefront the issue of current and future role of the kingdom in the global energy and environment landscape. In this webinar, we will hopefully discuss many issues related to climate and energy, including the broader context of global climate agreements and governance, where we started, where we are right now, and what does the outlook look like. We will then take a deep dive into the recent COP26, its different tracks, and what are the main objectives and goals of the COP26 and how they were achieved, if achieved. And then we will also zoom into the region here in Middle East, and in particular the kingdom, and have a conversation on the implementation of the Paris agreements. What are the key initiatives, policies, enablers that either introduced or need to be introduced to facilitate the implementation. Of course, the conversation will not be concluded without discussion on the outlook and what is expected of COP26, 27 and COP28, both of which will be held in the region here in Egypt and the UAE. To shed some light on these issues and many more, I'm delighted to be joined today with my dear friend and colleague, Engineer Khalid Abuleif. Khalid has over 30 years of experience on sustainability, climate change policy, and carbon management. Currently, he is a senior advisor to His Royal Highness, the Minister of Energy here in the Kingdom on sustainability and climate policy. He's the lead negotiator for climate change agreements and the Kingdom focal point to the Secretariat for United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCC, and the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, the IPCC. And he was the chair of the G20 Climate Stewardship Working Group in 2020. In his current capacity, Engineer Khalid is also leading the Kingdom's team and focal point for the clean energy initiatives, including the Carbon Sequestration Leadership Forum since 2005, Clean Energy Ministerial since 2014, and Mission Innovation since 2015. Engineer Khalid, it's an honor to have you with us today, and thank you for joining. To moderate the conversation, I'm delighted to introduce my colleague, Mary Loomy, who is a research fellow here at KAPSARC. Mary is a policy-oriented social scientist who has been studying climate change, energy transition, and sustainable development policy in the Gulf and globally for the last 15 years. She has worked with other leading energy, sustainable development, and foreign policy research institutions, including Oxford Institute for Energy Studies, the International Institute for Sustainable Development, Georgetown University, and the Emirates Diplomatic Academy, among many others. Without further ado, I would like to pass the mic to Mary to start the conversation with Engineer Khalid. Mary, the mic is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Fahad. It's also on my behalf a pleasure to welcome you all here to this SAEE and KAPSARC hosted event. I'm thrilled to be here with His Excellency Khalid Abuleif for this fireside chat, which will last in total an hour and a half. Before we go ahead with the conversation, I just have a couple of very brief housekeeping remarks. So as you may have already heard, the event is being recorded and we'll have two parts. In the first part, we'll have a conversation around these three themes that Dr. Fahad already outlined, namely the broader context of global climate governance, COP26, and Saudi Arabia and how it's implementing and supporting the implementation of the Paris Agreement. After that, about halfway through, we will have a Q&A session. And for that, please note, we very much welcome your questions. Please put them in the Q&A box, not in the chat box, where we'll pick them up. And we have a very large attendance today, so we may not be able to take every single question, but we will do our best to pick a selective, representative selection of them. Now, our guest today, His Excellency Abuleif, does not need introductions to those following the UN climate negotiations. He's been involved in the regime since the 90s, since the very beginning. And based on at least UN records, his first COP as the lead climate negotiator for Saudi Arabia was 2012 in Doha. I was myself working on the organizing side of that COP, and I remember as a key outcome from that conference for this region, a decision on a term called co-benefits, which I'm sure we might hear a bit more later on. But essentially, it recognized the GCC countries' special national circumstances under the Climate Convention. Today, he has agreed to share his perspectives on these three broad topics. On the first one, which we'll kickstart without further ado, Your Excellency Khalid, our first theme will hopefully help the audience understand a little bit what climate governance, global climate governance, and what the negotiations in your view are about, and how Saudi Arabia participates in them. We have a very diverse crowd today, so we will try and explain things to then enable us to go to more technical issues and sort of understand why actually it matters, and then talk after that about the COP and about Saudi Arabia. So my first question to you is about the setup, the so-called architecture under which the UN climate negotiations take place. We have three treaties and we have this convention, the UNFCC, which is the basis of everything. It sets the broad principles, which still matter a lot today. So could you talk to us about these principles, these convention principles? What are they? Where do they come from? And indeed, why do they still matter today? Over to you.
Thank you so much, Mary, Dr. Majid, Dr. Fahad. It is a great pleasure to be here with you. As a matter of fact, it's a great honor to be addressing this crowd today, and very much privileged for that choice and for this gathering. Back to your question, Mary. No doubt that the UNFCC, which is, if you read it, it is the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. It's as it says, it's a framework. It's a framework that puts the foundations that we will be building our experience as we move forward in the future on those foundations. And those foundations included a clear objective, very significant and important principles, as well as we looked at the commitments and enabling provisions that would help this convention grow with time. The main part of it is that in its objective, it recognized 4 or 5 things that are important. Number one, it recognized that the concentration of the atmosphere has to be managed somehow, because that concentration is growing so fast, and we needed to make sure that through that concentration, we are helping to address the global warming question with that. But connected to that very much, issues related to sustainable development, adaptation, with making sure that it is happening in a gradual way and it's not in a destructive way. Also food security and sustainable development as an important enablers for us to deal with this important question. However, the real thing that really stayed with us and became part and parcel of all actions we do under this convention, whether from the design point of view or even the implementation point of view. As a matter of fact, each and every decision we make, we always measure it against those principles that we have agreed to have. And these are 5 main principles. The first one of all these principles, and we call it the mother of the principles, is the common but differentiated responsibility, which is basically a principle that recognizes that there are leaders and there are others who has to follow. And those leaders are those that are well established and have managed in the past to come to their development, but also developing countries are following and moving in that direction. Now, this, as a matter of fact, principle has evolved with time. It became common but differentiated responsibility and respective capability as we moved towards Kyoto Protocol. And then as we moved in the Paris Agreement, we added to that also common but differentiated responsibility and respective capabilities in light of national circumstances. And believe me, it makes a big difference. And it shows how this framework or this regime has moved throughout time. But the second important principle that was there is a great recognition that there are different natural circumstances. And if we look at the different regions, we see the different outlook, we see the different priorities that they have, we see the different development that they have, we see the different needs that they do, and the different national circumstances. So that was a recognition that this is an issue that we need to deal with and address as we move forward. A third principle, which was also very important, is that we need to take precaution. You know, when we started in 1990, science was not very clear at that time. But we all recognize that there is something that we need to do something about. And the science is evolving. As a matter of fact, also the policy is evolving. And how the impacts of such efforts are going to be are all issues that need to be examined as we move forward. This is called the precautionary measure that we need to take. So the precautionary measure, we take measures, even though we are not too sure that the science is very clear, or we're not too sure where the impact are moving or how it means. So it's more like the classic learning by doing. So that's basically the issue that we have. But there are 2 conditions with that. The first condition is that we need to watch for cost effectiveness. And cost effectiveness was very important measure with this precautionary measure. But also in addition to that, inclusivity. When we say inclusivity in different sectors, inclusivity in different circumstances, inclusivity in different gases, inclusivity in all of the other issues that we really need to look at, because inclusivity means we can manage the situation as we move. A third principle that is extremely important also at the debate, it is the right to development. It is a right to sustainable development, as a matter of fact, whereby we really need to make sure and ensure that any action we do in this regard has to be within the context of that work. So if you notice, even the Paris Agreement, when we had to go and do all those actions to address climate change, it says very clearly in the context of sustainable development and eradication of poverty. So these two important elements are there to always for us to work for when we take any action as we move forward. Now, the last and a very important principle is making sure that measures that are taken are not going to be undermining open international trade. And the trade issue became extremely important. We should not use those measures that we do here as a disguise measure to undermine that very important principle. So these 5 principles, as a matter of fact, are basis, and we just built the governance on that basis, the implementation in those bases. Even if you notice that the COPs move into different regions. We have different 5 regions because we recognize that these regions are have different circumstances. So you'll see a COP happening in Europe, then a COP happening in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America, North America, and so on. All those COPs that happens are to ensure that we are not leaving anybody behind. We are addressing the different national circumstances of each region.
Right. Great. You bring up all the key principles, and I think all of these we know are well reflected in the Paris Agreement and in the negotiations. The key principle of common but differentiated responsibilities, which we know for the acronym CBDR, is one that still frames very much the debate. So why is it so difficult? Some countries agreed already back in the 90s, some countries are required to do more, and these are usually the developed countries. And then that has obviously evolved. You brought up an interesting theme, which is inclusivity. And I think that is something that also is reflected in the Paris Agreement very much. The idea was to get everybody on board, and allowing countries each to do things in their own way based on their national circumstances is a key feature of that. I wonder if you could talk about that, how the so-called nationally determined contribution, which is a key mechanism of the Paris Agreement, how does it reflect what you just said? And what are the NDCs?
Absolutely. Mary, to get to that point, I think we need to just see how did this whole regime evolve on the basis of these principles. As you see, we moved from the UNFCC into the Kyoto Protocol, where we also took all these principles as part of that question. However, at that point, it used to be a top-down regime that basically caps emissions for a group of countries, which is the developed countries, and distribute different obligations on them. And we worked on the basis of seeing that happen. Now, as we moved forward in this process, and many consider Copenhagen as a failure. As a matter of fact, I consider it personally as a great success, because it realized at that point that the only way we can be inclusive and that we can bring in everyone into this regime is that we really need to look at a hybrid model of what we call bottom-up and top-down. And the bottom-up part of it really heavily relies on the commitment part, where countries themselves self-differentiate on the basis of their circumstances and where do they stand on their economic development, those measures that they could do while they are also helping advance their economic sustainable development. And this is what we call indices, nationally determined contribution. And these nationally determined contributions are left for countries to decide themselves how are they going to be doing efforts to contribute to this effort. But doing that alone was not enough, because we really need to have that assurance that we are moving in the right track globally. We had this top-down regime, which is basically the Paris Agreement. So the Paris Agreement is there to regulate and look at how are we going to make sure that those nationally determined contributions are enabled and are moved in the direction of helping the process forward. And that's basically what we had in the Paris Agreement. We had so many mechanisms and enablers there that included transparency, included issues related to looking at guidelines to help countries understand better how to do their indices, looking at stock taking from one period to another to see, are we moving in the right direction, and are we coming to the obligations or the objectives we have. Then we are looking also at tracking some of these those indices among ourselves as countries and learning from each other. And this is what we call the monitoring and review process. Not only that, but also a compliance regime that would, to a certain extent, help countries, deliver on those points that they have any lack with. So with this bottom approach, which self-differentiate, also the top-down approach, it has a CBDR to it. What is the CBDR for that, Mary? It is basically making sure that those guidelines are done in an inclusive way, whereby each and every region can utilize them, recognizing their circumstances are fully integrated on those. So this is, that brings us back to this issue of inclusivity and making sure that those guidelines are not leaving anyone behind. Another, principle as part of the CBDR is also flexibility, knowing that some of these guidelines would really need to be flexible to a certain extent, so that regions that would not have the capacity to do some of this can work with other to bring their capacity up to that level where they could meet those obligations. So, and this is the hybrid approach that we had for the Paris Agreement and the success we had for the Paris Agreement. Let's not forget, Mary, that this did not come as of today. This came out of a 20 years experience of building a regime that basically, to me, it is extremely innovative, progressive, and working over the 30 years with many environmental agreements. I can see that this agreement by itself stands up compared to other, because it basically built on the experiences they had from 1992 when it was endorsed, all the way when we had the Paris Agreement. To me, the Paris Agreement is the ultimate instrument that we really need to see how we could make sure that we, protect it and implement it in a.
I cannot but fully agree. I know people who follow this process and people worldwide are very frustrated about how slowly the UN moves. But at the same time, it's an incredibly refined machinery that's been built up over many years. It is a very complex process with 196 or 7 different parties. And you very eloquently described some of the complex mechanisms where countries put whatever they see as their best possible contribution to the table. And then there is a check every 5 years. There's a point where there's a stock take on how well our country is doing. And then that mechanism builds ambition over time. So the mechanism is there, and now it's up to countries, of course, to implement it. On that theme of science, you mentioned the precautionary principle, and you talked about how there's a need for some top-down elements, and we could argue that science is one of those. Science doesn't negotiate, as we famously know that. It would be interesting to hear also, drawing from your experience, because you are Saudi Arabia's focal point for the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change as well. A little bit about the science policy interface. How does it work? The UNFCC, the convention's work is informed by science. So on the one hand, on the IPCC side, how much of the science you would say is political? Is it pure science? And then when it feeds into the UNFCC, how much of it is technical? How political is it?
Well, I tell you, it was a great pleasure to be part of this process from its inception, Louis, because it was a very interesting process that we had. IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, is a body that was established before the convention. If it wasn't for the IPCC, I wouldn't think we would have really been able to build the framework convention, as a matter of fact. Most of these principles were taken out of those discussions and all of the work of the science, both in a physical adaptation as well as mitigation elements will really help in us building a regime that could tackle policy issues at a later stage. But you know, the beauty about the IPCC is that as we moved with time, we learned how to make sure that we are protecting science and at the same time providing science. And then there was a term that we have introduced as we moved forward in the IPCC development, a term called policy relevant, but not policy prescriptive, which was extremely important because this is a principle whereby you are making sure that the science itself should not be worked out in any way that would undermine science in general. So, and that's why we had to create 3 levels of different materials in the IPCC. One level, it's a pure scientific level where scientists themselves work together and they come up with something called the underlying reports for the physical science, for the adaptation, and for the mitigation side. And all those basically different elements are put in chapters, and these chapters are called the underlying reports. Now, these are the responsibility of the scientists. Policymakers cannot really do much other than making sure that these issues are meeting the mandates that were given to them when we started the process. The second level is more into the technical summary, and which is much more quasi-science that was done by scientists also, not by policymakers, where you have the bureau members who are scientists from governments are working with the other members of the scientific group to work together to come up with this technical summary that would help us come up with the real summary maker, a policy for summary makers. Now, which is the SPMs. Those summary for policy makers, both reports would go back into a panel that include all United Nations members that are members of UNEP and WMO, and they sit together and work together, those scientists from governments, and to see how they can put these reports in a language that would be understandable by the policy and by the UNFCC. This is where you have the ultimate level of politics on that side. And this is very small summaries. They are almost, they should be between 20 to 40 pages and very much concise in picking those issues that would really help discussions within the UNFCC move forward. Now, after you finish this, you'll have another level of check also within the UNFCC itself. Now you will have the governments of the UNFCC review those policymaker summaries and give their views about them and say exactly what elements are very relevant to the work that they have. And from there, we pick and choose those elements that would contribute to the different agenda items and move the agenda items in a way that would meet the ultimate objective of the convention. So as you can see, the science goes through so many levels that would, at the end of the day, come to a point where it could really be utilized for policy making.
Yeah, it's an incredibly complex and intricate process. And I think it'll be exciting to see how the new global stocktake, which will take place in 2023 for the first time under the UNFCCC, which very much draws from the IPCC and other science inputs from all around the world as well. And I know Saudi Arabia is very actively involved. So it'll be very exciting to see how that shapes up. It's not really been done yet. So yet another interface. Now, one more thing I think it would be really interesting to highlight for those who don't go to the negotiations, who don't deal with how difficult it is actually in a process that functions on a consensus-based mechanism, which means that in theory, if one country opposes, there is no decision, there is no agreement. And the key to understanding is that countries negotiate in groups and they organize and coordinate in these groups, both outside and inside the negotiations. Could you tell a little bit about the key negotiating groups for Saudi Arabia. I know there's at least the G77 in China. There's the so-called like-minded developing countries. What are these? And then there is the Arab group, in which Saudi Arabia is a lead, often in the lead coordinating position. So how do these groups, what do they represent, and how do they help promote Saudi Arabia's interests in the negotiations?
Well, as you said, Mary, just imagine working by consensus, which means that at least one or two countries, if they do have serious problems, then things will not move. But yet, we have moved since we started in 1995 with COP1, all the way to today. As a matter of fact, we came up with an instrument that was, really significant, which is the Paris Agreement. That was inclusive. It had everybody believed in it. Everybody moved in that direction. So as a matter of fact, on how difficult it looks, it was extremely useful to have that consensus tool, because it really ensured that those principles really met, and we all aspire to it. But we all also aspire to move this agenda item and to move the global objective that we have put for ourselves, and we move to do that. Now, imagine 190 plus countries sitting in one room and try to come up with a decision. It's just incredibly impossible. It's just as you said, you will never be able to do so. So as we moved throughout the processes since 1990, after the Sustainable Development Earth Summit in 1992, this concept of groupings came to be very important in the negotiation. So what you have two major blocks. One block of great interest is developed countries that have the leadership on the work that we have. But also another block is the developing countries. But also two blocks trying to discuss with each other would have been almost impossible to do so. And as a matter of fact, with time, we came up with groupings for both clubs. In the developed countries, you had three major groupings that were very relevant in making policy as we move forward. The EU in one hand, the umbrella group, which is a collection of countries outside of Europe, but also they are members of the OECD countries, and also the Environmental Integrity Group, which also has its number 3 or 4 members that are also have different national circumstances, and they clutter together to work towards agreements. And on the other side, you had other 6. You have a major working group, which is G77 in China, and that's a major grouping for developing countries. However, that group alone, you have 134 countries. It will be impossible to come up with decisions there. So it has to also come into clutter into different national circumstances. So you will have small island states cluttering together as one group under the umbrella of G77 in China. You have, on the other hand, ILAC. You have like-minded developing countries. You have African group cluttering together. You have the least developed countries also cluttering together as a group. And then you have the Arab group with their also national circumstances getting that cluttering together as a group. So you'll have like 9 groups that are very active, as a matter of fact, in the process. So you really consolidated 190 plus countries into 9 groups that work together, discussing issues among themselves and coming up with decisions that are shaping our not only governance, but also implementation and all the aspects of decisions that we have out of the COPs.
That's right. And to my understanding, the like-minded developing countries is a core group for Saudi Arabia. I understand this principle of common but differentiated responsibilities that we talked about is one of the key themes for this group, and an Arab group has its own interests. But I think that brings me to the final question in this first part about the overall theme of governance. Saudi Arabia is known as a very active participant in the negotiations. Could you describe this role? What drives it? What are the goals that Saudi Arabia seeks to achieve? And how has Saudi Arabia shaped the process along all these years?
Thank you, Mary. Well, let me divide it into three parts here. One about Saudi Arabia's teams in these processes. I tell you, truly very significant influence they have in these processes, working with their partners on the other side. As you said, the two groupings that are very relevant to Saudi Arabia is making sure that principles are adhered to, and we're not moving away from them. So common but differentiated responsibility is an important principle for us. And we work within the like-minded group to make sure that decisions are, they adhere to those principles that we have agreed to in the climate convention. But also within the Arab group, national interest of this region is very unique compared to other regions. When you look at the importance of adaptation for this region, and when you see the endowments and that they have with regards to natural resources, whether in agriculture or in hydrocarbons or in other areas. And also when you see the sensitivities of their ecosystems, you will realize that we are a natural group that are working to make sure that their national circumstances are fully taken into account. So within these groups, we work heavily in making sure that our interests are, and the interests of others are included in the final outcomes. But the real success that we have here, we really have a leadership that are very much involved. I have to say, His Royal Highness Prince Mohammed, he has been very active over the past few years in making sure that climate change is becoming an important agenda item for Saudi Arabia, and also being addressed not only in Saudi Arabia, but also in the region. But also you have His Royal Highness Prince Abdulaziz, the Minister of Energy in Saudi Arabia. He has been part of this process just like me. He started with it. He knows it all. He lived it all. He has all that institutional history of the evolution of this process, and what does it mean and where is it going. And he has been actively involved not only at the international level but also at the national level. Now add to that having young team that are very much committed, very much enthusiastic, really multidisciplinary in all those areas. You will find them in each and every room, really trying to make sure that those principles are being applied and moved forward. So we're really lucky for that to be there. Now, if we look at the second part of it, is that what is the objective for us on this? Basically, it's the principles. We really want to make sure that we are sticking to the words of the agreements that we agree to, that we are implementing them in a balanced manner, that we are working in a direction where we are helping evolve the principles in a way that we're not leaving anything out, where we'll be coming later on and then revising everything to make sure that they are meeting those principles. So, this is the issues that we always keep in front of our eyes when we go to these meetings. Now, how did we shape this process? Exactly, I want to come back to your example that you have just brought. When we came to a point where developing countries would have to be a major contributor to these efforts, we realized that the national circumstances for the region that have endowment of hydrocarbons and major work, they really needed to worry about two things. One thing, they have to worry about their resilience, making sure that they are resilient enough, that their economy is done in the right way, that would help us not only meet our objectives, but also go above and beyond those objectives. So that resilience became extremely important for us to make sure that our economy is diversified enough, and also we're given the opportunity to diversify, to make sure that we are contributing heavily to this effort, these collective efforts that we all have. And Vision 2030 is a basic classic example of where this country we're moving after 2015 when we had. Now, the other thing that we really wanted to make sure is that you cannot create sectors from nothing. You cannot create sectors with negative emission with zero emission. The only way you create new sectors, you would have to do emissions, which means that, but the relevance for us is even those sectors, when you develop them, you want to develop them with the best possible technology that exists, that at the end of the day, contribute to the efforts that you are helping. And this was the creation of the co-benefit question. Yes, we can diversify. However, we need to diversify in a clean way. And not only in a clean way, we would like to see that efforts that has been put there also recognized and checked at the international level. And this is where the co-benefit started. As you remember, it was fully integrated in the indices as we moved to Poland and Lima. And then even in the Paris Agreement, we have Article 4.7 and Article 415 that recognize those circumstances and also regulate them and put the right framing for them from transparency view, from tracking view, from relevance view, so that we know that they are real and they really make a difference. And it is a real contribution to this effort. Not only that, but also in COP24, when we met in Poland, we have implemented the rules and we created those rules and we made these rules reality to make sure that those institutions are fully existing, to make sure that that track is well understood and well recognized. We did not stop there, Mary. After that, in G20, we said, okay, the approach that is already created by our partners, for example, in the EU and others, may not work for Saudi Arabia. So we really needed to come up with an approach that would be inclusive enough. And this is the second carbon economy that came out of the G20. So if you see it is evolving with that, then we really needed to walk the talk. So we had the national program on circular carbon economy, which is fully established and it's working right now. Not only that, we also have the ambition for that program to move. And with His Royal Highness Prince Mohammed initiatives on Saudi Green Initiative and Middle East Initiative to make sure that that path is moving. And Saudi Arabia is really moving in the direction of showing the world that we really mean business. And not only being busy, we really want to take the leadership as we move forward.
Great. And after the next part, we'll get more in detail. I've seen some questions are already coming in that are very curious about the net zero target and everything that's happening in Saudi Arabia, the Green Initiative. So we will get there in a bit. But just to echo everything that you said, I think I share the same impression that the secret to the influential role that Saudi Arabia has played is that there is a strong mandate from the leadership. There is strong experience. The negotiators are very experienced. It is not the biggest delegation, but it is very active. So the negotiators are very skilled, and there's a strong stake, and it is understood very well. And I think this description of the so-called co-benefits, which I understand to mean that countries like Saudi Arabia will need to diversify their economies as part of this global energy transition. But that can also result in co-benefits, including lower emissions or even better resilience to climate change. So getting that recognized is really being consistent. And as you mentioned, it is in the Paris Agreement. So that's a testament to the active role. Now, turning to this year, because we would love to keep talking, but time is running, and so let's move to the next topic. What happened at this year's COP, the COP26 in Glasgow? And the first theme, just for people to understand what these COPs are, before we go to the actual outcomes, a lot happens at these COPs. There were close to 40,000 people who attended despite the pandemic this COP. So this has become a huge process. You've spoken about different tracks that sort of take place at these COPs. What are these tracks? What are the different actors involved? And just very briefly, what kind of issues under these tracks took place? What were the big issues at this COP?
And thank you, Mary. Now, before I get into that, Mary, I just wanted to make sure that all of us understand that the co-benefits does not work only for countries that have hydrocarbon endowments. No, it works for any country who have a limited economic diversification. For example, countries that are relying heavily on tourism could benefit from that. Countries that heavily rely on agriculture can benefit from that. All those countries who really have limited economic structure and they needed to diversify their structure, they can diversify it while benefiting from what the Paris Agreement have given them as part of that. So just a clarification there.
That's a great point. Thanks.
Yeah. Now, let me just go back to COP26. It's a significant. Why it's significant? It's a COP. It's number 26 out of other 25. And all of them were contributing to the overall of where we are today. If it wasn't for all the 25 COPs, we wouldn't be for where we are today. But COP26 had a special thing to it. Number one, we're coming out of pandemic. And as a matter of fact, we had almost 1 year inactive, 1 year where we connected 2 years in 1 year, basically. And we really need to make up for whatever we have lost in the pandemic on 2020. So that was, and for us to gather again together was extremely significant and important. And that's why this COP was very important. Another significant thing for this COP is that it is the starting point of this decade, which is an important decade that we have. And most of our contributions, some countries are 5 years, other are 10 years, but all of us are either 5 or 10 years. So by 2030, we will be completing our contributions that we had. So this is the starting point for the implementation track, where we really need to show that we need to implement our efforts further. So, and we realize that this is very important for our net zero issues also, the net zero aims that we had for ourselves with 2050 or 2060 or so. So this gave this COP special attention and special recognition. Now, knowing that, there were 3 major tracks during the COP. One is the mandated track. Now, the mandated track is a track that would look at the mandates, see where we are. And under the mandates, as a matter of fact, we needed to look at ambition. We needed to look at issues that has not been finalized in Poland in COP24 with the rule books. So we really needed to complete and finish the rule books. So there were many issues that were left open, for example, transparency, markets, issues related to common timeframes, issues related to response measures, loss and damage, finance, although adaptation. All these issues are issues that are still on the table that we really need to find ways and means to deal and address and make them ready for an implementation decade. So that was basically the first track. And this is where the negotiations take place and all the discussion happened there because it's legally mandated and outcomes there are legally binding. Now, a second track is usually a track where the presidency utilize in a way that would reflect regional circumstances. And they would focus on areas. For example, the UK focus was, as we all know, is mitigation. And the focus was, as President Prime Minister Boris Johnson, had the 4 items that he wanted to do something with: cash, cars, trees, and
Coal.
and another
Coal, I think.
coal, exactly.
Yes.
So all these issues, if you notice, it reflects different areas of importance for mitigation. Finance is the cash, coal is the energy, trees is the nature-based solutions, and so on. And cars is transport sector and what it contains. So all those sectors were very important for that theme. So you notice that we had themes, 8 themes over the 2 weeks of the COP, where we had different activities happening, and those themes created a process. But these themes, they did not only have government, they had also government as well as non-government actors. Then you would have this track, which is climate action. And this is the overall efforts that happens within the action agenda of the UNFCC. Under that, basically all governments have, most governments have pavilions, most institutions, industries, and others have their pavilions, and they work on side events and issues that relates to the implementation of efforts under the convention. And you can't imagine how much you can learn from all the experiences and efforts that is happening within that domain. So if that would create networking, it would help people with ideas, it would help people make sure that their implementation plan are working, and then connect with others to make sure that they are moving in the right track. And so that is another track that is also taking place.
That's right.
So these are the 3 tracks that are, when you say it's a cup, it's not a cup. You could say it's 3 sub-cups.
Very well. I totally agree.
Happening at the same time, parallelly at the same time. It's amazing, you know, how these huge conferences are.
It's a huge operation. So let's very briefly grill a bit or go a bit deeper into the mandated track that you mentioned, the one with the legal outcomes, let's say, the one that is intergovernmental, where governments go negotiate, sit in these grey rooms and come out with negotiating text and decisions. You mentioned quite a bit of technical terms there that we're familiar with, but the audience might not be. So there was the word ambition. Then we heard about the Paris implementation guidelines, which are also known as the Paris Rulebook, the Paris Agreement Rulebook, which pretty much got finally finalized at this COP. We have the carbon markets under Article 6, non-markets. Then we have a thing called transparency. You mentioned the common timeframes. And then there are these broader issues as well, which are very dear to developing countries. In particular, you mentioned the Saudi Arabia's emphasis on balance. And I think this speaks to that. There are issues that are dear to developing countries, including adaptation to climate change and finance, that developing countries often feel get a bit ignored when there's too much emphasis on just emissions. These are the so-called means of implementation. You need finance to be able to reduce emissions and to adapt to climate change. So could you unpack to the non-person not so familiar with the jargon, the COP outcome under this track, and maybe pick 1 or 2, 3 themes where you think there were significant outcomes, and then why do they matter? What was good about this COP?
Well, you know, the real good thing out of this COP, Mary, was that we at least know that our rule book is complete. Now, we have all the elements. Still, you know, we have to recognize that these rule books are just like a child. They are crawling, they need to then walk, and then they need to run, hopefully, in the future. But this is the governance. This is how things happen. But we, at least the basic foundation for those rule books has been completed, which was really a great celebration for all those who has been following this COP. You know, we had a cover decision, basically, and usually cover decision reflects, you know, the ambitions or the aspirations of the host countries, and making sure that their themes are considered and are fully integrated into this. And this is where Europe had an opportunity here where they could really shape that. As you know, it would move in COP27 and 28, and then you would see different regions looking at these issues in different ways, and they would have cover decisions that would also cover those issues that are relevant to their circumstances. And this is the design of the COP. Is that we really need to, as we move in governance, we need to look at the different regional concerns and regional circumstances as we have. But in the cover decision, it was a difficult decision, as you all know. You have heard it all over the news because the balance there was important. People were looking to make sure that we are not leaving the main pillars of the Paris Agreement unchecked. So we had looked at the best possible way of reaching mitigation efforts, but also we are looking at adaptation efforts. We're looking at what is really needed from a finance point of view. Also, we looked at issues related to loss and damage and adaptation and so on. So all those issues which are pillars to the Paris Agreement. We know the three pillars for the Paris Agreement: mitigation, adaptation, and finance flows. And all those three pillars, as a matter of fact, needed to be addressed in a way that would be balanced. Because if you have an aspiration to raise collective effort, you would have to look at the collective picture. And then there was this issues about mitigation itself, because the debate is this: should we target fossil fuel or should we target emission? How do we deal with this? How because there are interpretation of the Paris Agreement, which is basically the 4.1, because everybody realized that 4.1 is the mitigation objective. But 4.1 talks about emission balance of greenhouse gases between emission by sources and removal by sinks. So that balance is related to emission. But we know that other circumstances of governments would also like to see if they can focus more into different energy resources. And coal was at this time at the discussion. And we had to find the language that would make sure that for those who wants to address the coal, they can do so. But for those who are very important for them to address the emission part of it is also there. So that language that you have is a combination of a language that would put all of them together. For your information, that language was, His Royal Highness Prince Abdulaziz in Napoli has been working on it with many ministers. And, when we came to G20 meeting in Rome, we finally finalized it and encapsulated it in a way that would reflect both concerns, the side of those who wants to move on the resource side and those who wants to address the emission side. But also that debate came back again into the COP26. But, we came back to the language that we have already agreed to in G20, which was, to me, is really a great landing zone for all, sides to be happy with that. So, I think it was an excellent discussion and an excellent outcome. I tell you, COP26 for us is a success. It depends on the expectation. COP26, if you have a certain expectation and that expectation much higher than what you get, then you think it's a failure. But if you look at it from a collection of COPs that you had since COP1 until COP26, I tell you, COP26 has been really a great success.
I would fully agree with you on that. There's a full rule book now for the Paris Agreement, and that cover decision that you've been talking about, there are dozens of decisions from this COP, but the cover decision, which is called the Glasgow Climate Pact, I recommend also listeners to go and look it up, because it very nicely summarizes many of these other decisions. And then it picks up on all these issues, including the one that Your Excellency, were talking about, that actually brought in text from the G20 and a lot of presidency priorities. So a very interesting decision, and a lot of mandates for the next year. So we'll get back to that a bit later, but now it's 5 p.m. We have half an hour left. So I would suggest we spend the next 15 minutes talking about Saudi Arabia. And then we take a few questions before closing at 5:30, if that is fine. I think many people here are very keen. We have, at least among the registered participants, we had a lot of people signing up from Saudi Arabia. And I think internationally also, there's been huge interest in the recent announcements from the region. A lot has happened. Just a week before the COP, Saudi Arabia announced a net zero target, and these major climate-related initiatives under the Saudi and the Middle East Green Initiatives, and then this new NDC, this new Paris Agreement plan as well. Now, before we go into details on that, you mentioned the circular carbon economy, and you tied it very nicely into how it actually builds on a very long, it has a very long history in a way. And so could you talk to us a little bit about the concept of circular carbon economy? Where does it come from, just briefly? How does it connect to the Paris Agreement? And yeah, what does it mean in the Saudi context? Why is Saudi Arabia using it, and why is it a good concept?
Well, again, Mary, I'll take you back to after we completed the rule books. His Royal Highness Prince Abdulaziz wanted to make sure that we come up with an approach that is inclusive enough, that would also include Saudi Arabia's concerns into it, but also does not leave others. And in the FII in 2019, he announced it, as a matter of fact, in that meeting. And he said that we would be working on an inclusive approach, which is an approach that is well known of dealing with waste in general, and which is the circular carbon economy. However, it's developed in a way that would, circular economy developed in a way that would address emission. And from that, building on that concept, as a matter of fact, KAPSARC, your institution, the institution you have right now, has been incubating that idea. And we looking at all the options of how can we utilize the circular economy and develop it in a way that would be inclusive enough to address all concerns. And as a matter of fact, they came up with basically the same concept: reduce, reuse, recycle. And this is what is the circular economy. However, you add another one component to it, which is remove. And the remove component would talk to how we can reach the net zero issues when it has to do with Article 4.1. To make it easy and simple for everybody to understand why it is inclusive, I would put this in three domains, or three buckets, as they say. One is that making sure that you're burning less hydrocarbons, which means that if you have energy efficiency, if you have actions related to renewable, where you are avoiding to burn or combust hydrocarbons, or if you are utilizing nuclear or others, that is what we call avoidance. Avoidance by making sure that we are not starting the cause of the issue. And that is an area where we need to address. And I think we really had great solutions for that, because that area has been doing well. It has a lot of investment. We had great attention on that track. And we've been, and as a matter of fact, the European Green Initiative heavily rely on that component. But we really think that there will not be a success for any future net zero without addressing the hydrocarbon domain, which is basically the domain where you would have you combust and you would have an emission source. Now, what you need to do, you need to prevent that emission from going to the atmosphere, because our problem is this going to the atmosphere. So if you prevent it by capturing it and then you're doing one of the issues. You're utilizing it, or you are recycling it, or you're removing it from that source into some media where it would not be ever go to the atmosphere, then I think you have already came to that prevention, and you address that concern. And this is basically the second domain that we work with. But a very important third domain also is that, what you have already in the atmosphere and you need to deal with. And this is where you have two possibilities: either technology, which is the direct air capture and storing it in geological storage, but also the nature-based solutions, where you are taking CO2 out of the atmosphere into biomass in general, whether it is trees or on mangroves or so. So you have these three domains, where each domain have great relevance. Each domain, you would have many countries identifying themselves with one or two of them. You would have countries that could say, well, already I could work with domain 1 and domain 3, for example, but domain 2 is not important for us, and that's basically the green initiative. But you have another domain with circular carbon economy, where this is also important because you are endowed with such material, and you really know at the end of the day you need to deal with that, and you want to make sure that that hydrocarbon addressed at the end of the day for you, since you're going to use it very much in the next 3 dB, and all the indications show that we are going to do so. So we really need to address it at this early stage, make sure that it is also cleaner and part of our net zero actions as we move forward. So that's why circular carbon economy, we felt it was an excellent one. And that has been developed not only by KAPSARC, but I know KAPSARC has partnered with many international, very credible international organizations. And they came up with the program, and then we have tested it against G20, and then we had that endorsement from everybody that this is inclusive. And then we worked very hard since then to see how we could look at these different domains and move them forward.
Yes, absolutely.
I hope I did not confuse you there. So
that's a tour de force. Again, on the theme of inclusivity, sort of very consistently that you were highlighting already previously, and the fact that the focus is not on the sources, so not on the energy sources, but rather on avoiding emissions. So being agnostic about that, being holistic, and then based on each country's national circumstances again. You did mention natural sinks, renewable energy. You mentioned hydrocarbon solutions as well, which brings me to the next question. There have been a lot of policies set in recent months, or consolidated in recent months, under the Saudi Green Initiative and the NDC relating to renewables and natural sinks, nature-based solutions. So could you talk a little bit about and this is speaking already to a question that we've received, what are sort of concrete steps and policies and plans in place in these areas? And if you want to talk about them along the different R's of the circular carbon economy, that's fine. If you want to just give the highlights of a few areas, that's equally fine. But so how is Saudi Arabia now going to be participating in the implementation of the Paris Agreement?
Mary, I tell you, really after we came out of the G20 and recognizing that this concept finally was, with the help of everyone in the G20 and others from international organizations, came to a real conceptual stage. We really at that stage, we felt that, the kingdom felt that we really need to walk the talk and really wanting to be a leader. The two initiatives that has been highlighted by His Royal Highness Prince Mohammed were announced, and also we had a conference to showcase what came out of that. It was huge and was important, and it was a complementary track of whatever we have been doing and the leadership that we had in this area. I tell you, those programs, the beauty about these initiatives, they are solid. They are not only announcements. They have institutions, very clear governance at the highest level. His Royal Highness Prince Mohammed preside over a committee that looks at those different issues. So exactly, it is going that far and that high. Not only that, it has institutions that monitors and reports on the work, and these are non-profit institution that is there to look at those issues and help advise that committee in making sure that it is doing all those initiatives that they have. They have three major subcommittees presided by ministers of specialty, and those subcommittees are working at all levels. At the environmental side, where we're really looking at how we want to improve and make sure that nature-based solutions are well adapted, from conservation to rehabilitation to restoration, tree plantings and all those things, even targets that has been put there, and targets that almost impossible. But this leadership, they do not believe in impossible. They really want to go all the way to making sure that we do all the best to do it. But in addition to that, you have managing the emission and the circular carbon economy under that, and a very major important initiative, which is basically the energy mix. The energy mix for Saudi Arabia, where the target was 50% renewable, 50% gas. That was a major decision that has to be taken and to move. It would really be a game changer. Not only that, I think it was already recognized by many of our partners, including the United States, as one of the highest contributions that they have seen so far on this in this domain. So which is shows that this country is moving in that region of leadership and trying to move that. Now, with all the initiatives, with this one, with the hydrogen, with also the clean fuels and other initiatives that we have as part of this, when you collect all those initiatives, we were able to double our 2015 national contributions from 130 to 78. And as a matter of fact, not only double it with a pledge, we already have funding that is allocated. We already have milestones, and all those projects will be monitored on an annual basis and transparent, because it will be shared with everybody in those different events that we're going to have at an annual meeting for this. It's a solid program. We really mean business, and at the national level, I think we really wanted to show that we are really walking that talk, and circular carbon economy is going to be a reality. We really mean it.
Yeah, we see a lot of determination, and the targets have been set, and they're very high. And of course, now the world is calling for all governments to show roadmaps and milestones. And you've just very nicely laid out what the plans are going ahead: finance, leadership, transparency, reporting, and so forth. So we very much look forward to hearing more on those, and also the NDC numbers and the details in perhaps the year or the next the near future, hopefully. So that's very exciting. I will combine the next two questions so that we still have time to pick a couple of questions from the audience. So the Middle East Green Initiative is kind of the regional dimension of the green initiatives. And there, if you could in a few words describe what is the vision there for the region, and then linking that to what our host, Dr. Fahad, kicked off with, which is that the next two COPs will be in this region. We will have a COP in Egypt, which is Africa region COP. So there will be a lot of focus on issues due to Africa, but Egypt is also an Arab country. And then the COP in 2023 will be in the UAE. And so what lies ahead? What exciting things? How can the region come together? And what should the region be promoting on the road to the next COPs?
We recognize that for a region that is so much homogeneous and have great coordination, many things, climate change has to be part of that and has to be part and parcel. And the kingdom wanted to make sure that they wanted to take the leadership in ensuring that we are working with other partners within the region to ensure our progress in a way that would reflect the natural circumstances of this region that we have. As we said, our natural circumstances is that we do have limited economic diversification, and we all need to diversify even more, whether it is in energy or in agriculture or on all other minerals that exist. That we have to somehow combine them together and make sure that it is happening. We really believe that circular carbon economy is going to be a good tool for us to design the different cooperation between the different parties in the region in a way that would go along with their natural circumstances, as well as their ambition to meet the work of the agreement that we have. So under that, to have many enablers, and those enablers are still under discussion, because this has to be a regional issue. A meeting has already been kicked off last year, and many meetings will come in the following years. And building on that, many enablers has been put. First, we making sure that this region is combined in a platform that would be looking at how can we design our different national circumstances with regard to circular carbon economy. We wanted to see how we wanted to also work with others to see passing experiences and investments in a way that would also help in the reduction of emissions coming from hydrocarbons. And not only that, but also in the renewable side, making sure that we are addressing ambitions of countries that have also in the renewable domain and renewable side. Also, we are looking at a regional hub for those countries that are endowed within the region, which is the GCC countries, hoping that, and Iraq, connecting these countries together in a hub that would collect CO2 and find ways and means to deal with them as one of those projects. But really, the two main significant initiative is clean cooking, and making sure that we are helping the international efforts in Africa and Asia and other countries in making sure that clean cooking is becoming a reality. And there is one initiative that we are working on with partners, as well as the CCE Climate Fund, where it will be a fund that would help also investments come in into the region, that would also help in utilizing much of the possibilities and opportunities that we have in the hydrocarbon sectors on those domains. Saudi Arabia has already announced that they will be contribute to almost 15% of those efforts, and we are looking forward to see how we could collectively work on them and have this become a reality.
Fantastic. So there's a huge amount of concrete initiatives and plans also lined up in this area, and we look forward. It's going to be an exciting year next year. A lot of work at home and internationally as well. Shall we try and yes?
Mary, I just wanted to add on this element of COP27 and COP28. And as you know, Her Excellency Yasmin Fuad, the Minister of Environment, has already announced, just like the UK, cash, cars, coal, trees, she also announced that the COP in Egypt is going to be land, water, ecosystems, as well as climate, which is more into the adaptation domain, which is extremely important, as a matter of fact, for this region. As you see, that is a circumstance that are going to be there. And also, if you hear Dr. Sultan Al-Jaber also came that, and he is really looking forward for COP27 to be a COP of solutions, a COP that would really push innovations, push technologies, and push solutions that would are pragmatic and would really meet the international ambitions that we have. So now, if you combine them together, you would see that you would have a great cup, that two cups that would complement each other into looking at the regional issues in a global context, also taking into account all other pillars in a balanced manner, mitigation, adaptation, finance, and others. So, putting them together in a way that would hopefully build on the success that we have in COP26.
Yeah, I have nothing to add. That's so incredibly comprehensive, and there's a lot of food for thought there, definitely. We have received a lot of questions, and they're very diverse. And the one that stuck to my eye was the international carbon markets, because there's a lot of hype now even around it. Markets seem to be, and actors seem to be very excited about things kicking off now, taking sort of off with the carbon market rulebook completed. So the person is asking, how do you expect or hope international carbon markets to develop from now onwards? And we have these so-called compliance markets where countries and governments might set a cap on emissions, and then there's trading. But then there's these so-called voluntary markets, which are more for businesses. And how are these going to work together? There's a lot to unpack here in this question. You can choose your angle to that, and maybe give a brief answer on what your thoughts are on Article 6, carbon pricing, maybe more broadly, and then we'll try and squeeze in one more question after that.
Absolutely. Again, market is an extremely important enabler to the Paris Agreement. And to tell you the truth, we are so happy that the decision was passed. We know that whatever decision we pass is going to be a decision at the crawling level, and we still have to develop it and move it forward. But having it on the ground, that really creates at least the starting points for all of us. Again, I come back to national circumstances, and which is the major pillar for markets. I can fully recognize a carbon trade for Europe, but I would really cannot imagine a carbon trade for regions that are still growing, and they are not sure exactly where their maturity are and where are the level of emissions that are going to be stabilized. Because, you know, in Article 4.1, it was very clear, we really need to make sure that maturity is there, and that everybody is reaching their peaking to a point where their economies are well structured and ready to raise their resilience against any future impacts out of measures that will be taken. However, that you know, would require, it means that if we look at it from a carbon price point of view, you would look at it, you know, to us, global is more like a Kyoto Protocol. Again, which is an instrument that was significant, and it was excellent, significant. We learned a lot from that instrument, but I don't think we're ready to work along that direction. A second level is national capping. National capping also has its advantages for those mature economies, but also it really does not have that much advantage for those countries that are still in the developing phase, and they are moving in that direction. What's important here is the nationally determined contribution. Nationally determined contribution is the instruments that would create the price at the local level, and some of us, maybe even at the industry level, where we can, as a matter of fact, realize great efforts in doing both things. Number one, we are managing and our contributions, and we're reducing those emissions. But at the same time, we're also managing the growth that we have, and raising the resilience of our economy for the system. So, you know, most of those economies, for example, many of those regions that have great endowments would really have to worry about, you know, looking at carbon pricing at an indices level, and ensuring that also their industries are moving in the right direction in removing emissions, yet not impairing diversification of their economy.
Very well, very well. I think this topic of Article 6 merits its own event. It's a very complicated issue, so hopefully we can continue the conversation on that another time. We will now proceed to one final question before I hand over back to our hosts to close. And I will tie this into a question I had for you also. So an audience member is asking, what are the top priorities for Saudi Arabia to accomplish by 2030 in the area of sustainability? So this is probably going beyond climate change to sustainable development, but you can speak to climate change if you wish. And more generally, what lies ahead for Saudi Arabia, for the kingdom? What are the big issues on the horizon and maybe what gives you hope?
Well, I have to say our hopes are very high, and I think we are realizing many of that. As a matter of fact, for us, I think by 2030, we are going to have an NDC and also an implementation and contribution that would heavily contribute to our net zero future. Our biggest hope is that we will be able, notwithstanding all the reports that says that many of the technologies that already exist for a circular carbon economy may come later, around 2030, maybe 2040. Many institutions have said that, more than half of the technologies that we need for reaching net zero is still, unavailable, and we are targeting, around 2040 as a date for that, and the expectation is there. I think if we work so hard to make sure that we can bring that time frame earlier, and we can bring in the right projects and the right actions in this 10 years, which in this critical 10 years, I am sure that our net targets net zero targets will be a reality. As long as we understand that in this world, we have so many approaches, and we need to be inclusive in those approaches, need to respect them, and we need to work with each other in a way that would ensure that those paths that are set, first, they are meeting their obligations, yet also they are in line with sustainable development objectives that you have set for yourself. Because sustainable development, it's not only global, but also it is local, because you need to bring that global into a local level. We have different national sustainable development paths and priorities for all of us out of all sustainable development efforts that we have. So, I am sure if we can put our efforts on those technologies, we will be able to hopefully realize sustainable development goals as well as our climate goal, the long-term plan.
Fantastic. Well, that's a great hopeful note to end on. And I think we've heard many, many big themes today. And I think it's an incredibly good summary of what climate change means for you, for Saudi Arabia. And I think there's hope, and action obviously is the key. And I think the theme of each contributing to the best of their abilities came through very strongly today. Inclusiveness, but the fact that also the common goal, the goal is common, and each country will have its own way to get there, and hopefully cooperation will help with that. So it's been an immense pleasure and an honor to have this conversation with you, Your Excellency. With that, thank you so much. I'll hand over to Dr. Farah Turki to close, unless you want to say one or two words before that.
The pleasure was mine, Mary, and I really did enjoy it. And I hope I asked many of those questions for the audiences that we have here today. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Khalid. It's been a great conversation. It's great remarks, and thank you very much for accepting the invitation. And hopefully, inshallah, more to come before or after the COP27, inshallah, if not before. And thank you, Mari, for an excellent moderation and highlighting the main issues. Just looking at the chat and the questions shows that we touched on many important issues, some of which we will zoom into moving forward with specific events. Before I close, I would like to thank His Excellency Dr. Majid Al-Munif, the chairman of the Saudi Association for Energy Economics, and Engineer Fahad Al-Ajlan, the president of KAPSARC, for their continuous support and enabling us to host these events. Also, thanks to Faris Al-Ataibi, who's a soldier behind the scene in all our events, either KAPSARC events or SAEE events. I mentioned in the opening that this will be our last event for the year, but next year we're planning 2 events in January, one in early January and the second on the second half of January. The first event will be an in-person event, book presentation and signing. The book title is The Challenge of Development and Oil Wealth in Saudi Economy by His Excellency Dr. Majid Al-Munif. And the second event, which will be more or less related to many of the issues that highlighted by Engineer Khalid, is the Saudi Arabia Green Initiatives, the road to net zero. So we will zoom into the Saudi Green Initiative. And within the first quarter, SAEE will also host many other events, including the way ahead for the circular carbon economy. So a special session on some of these frameworks that Khalid talked about. We will also have another event on renewable, Saudi Arabia renewable ambitions later in the quarter. Just to name a few that we are planning to host in the first quarter. So stay tuned, follow our or visit our website, kapsarc.org or sae-aee.sa. Look for announcements in our Twitter accounts for these events. Thank you very much, and wish you have a great day or evening if you are in Saudi. And I look forward to seeing you all again in another SAE or KAPSARC events or jointly. Thank you.